Get away from the door, Layla cried, her voice trembling with fear. She clutched the poker tightly with both hands. Please. A man's voice came from the other side, muffled by the wind and snow. I don't want to hurt anyone. I just need shelter for my son. Layla's heart pounded faster. Through the fogged-up glass, she saw the silhouette of a tall, broad-shouldered man bending over something smaller, a child. Snow swirled around them in thick flakes. Layla's fingers tightened on the doorknob. I don't let strangers into my house, she said sharply. Especially men. There was a pause. Then the voice spoke again, this time lower and more desperate. I understand. I wouldn't ask if I had a choice. He's sick. He's freezing. We just need one night to weather the storm. Layla hesitated. The cold was already seeping through the old wooden panels of the cabin. The electricity had gone out an hour ago. The fireplace was the only thing preventing the living room from turning into an icebox. She glanced at her mobile phone. No signal, no one to call. Only her, and now them. She peered through the peephole again. The man shifted slightly, revealing a small boy huddled in his arms. The child coughed severely. The sound was harsh and painful. That settled it. With a creak of old hinges, Layla opened the door. Snow instantly swirled inside, chilling her ankles through her socks. The man took a step forward so she could get a better look at him. He was tall, soaked from head to toe, with hair matted to his forehead. The boy in his arms buried his face in the man's coat, his body trembling. Come in quickly, Layla murmured, stepping aside. Thank you, the man nodded, carrying the child inside. She closed and locked the door. Sit by the fireplace and don't touch anything else. The man obediently sat, carefully settling the boy onto the old sofa. He unzipped his jacket and covered the child. Layla watched warily, still clutching the poker. What's your name? She asked. David, he replied. And this is Elijah. He's 6. He has a cough, probably the flu. You think so? She scoffed. You're taking a child through a blizzard? That's irresponsible. David lowered his gaze, brushing wet hair from his forehead. We had nowhere else to go. She hesitated, then turned towards the kitchen. I have dry towels and instant noodles. That's all. He nodded, thanking her quietly. When she returned with the towels, he took them gratefully and began to carefully wipe the boy, showing quiet paternal care. Layla stood across the room, arms crossed. She disliked this intrusion, these memories. A year ago, she had trusted someone with kind eyes who knocked on her door, and she almost lost everything. Now, this stranger was in her home. And why are you even here? She asked. There's no one around for miles. The blizzard has been in the news for days. David looked up. His eyes were dark and weary. I was trying to get Elijah to his grandmother's house in the next town. The roads closed behind us. We got stuck. Then the car broke down. She studied him carefully. In the firelight, he seemed ordinary. Not dangerous, but not entirely truthful either. There was something in his gaze he wasn't saying, and it concerned the boy. Elijah coughed weakly again. Layla exhaled sharply and went to the kitchen. It'll be chicken noodles, she muttered. A few minutes later, she brought 2 steaming mugs to the fireplace. David thanked her quietly. She handed a mug to the boy who was sitting in the far corner of the room. The silence was heavy, but not hostile. Only the crackling of the fire, the occasional clink of a spoon against ceramic, and the howl of the wind outside. Elijah fell asleep, his head resting on David's lap. Layla watched the flames, forcing herself to remain on guard. You don't have to be afraid, David said softly. I'm not afraid, she replied, though her voice trembled. You're letting 2 strangers into your home. I'd say you're brave. Or foolish, she chuckled faintly. I'd say the same to you. David chuckled softly. For the first time in a long time, the room felt warmer. One night, she said firmly, the storm should break by morning, then you'll leave. David nodded. One night is all we need. She looked at the boy's sleeping face, then at the man who held him so carefully. And for the first time in a long time, she wondered if opening the door was a mistake or the first right thing she'd done in a long time. The wind howled outside like a restless spirit, rattling the windows of the small cabin. The power had gone out completely. The fire in the fireplace flickered a quiet defiance, casting golden shadows on the walls. Layla lit 2 old candles she kept in a kitchen drawer. Their flames trembled as she placed them on the table between herself and David. The soup had cooled slightly, but the warmth remained. Elijah had managed only a few sips before drifting back to sleep in a cocoon of coat and blankets on the sofa. His breathing was ragged but now slower and steadier. Layla sat on the floor by the fireplace, drawing her knees up and wrapping her hands around a battered ceramic mug. David sat opposite her, holding his own mug, his face partly illuminated by the fire. In the candlelight, he looked less formidable, just a tired man, serene. "He loves chicken noodle soup," he said after a long silence, nodding towards his son. "Sorry, Habit. His mother passed away a few years ago, but whenever I made chicken noodle soup for Elijah, I'd say I was doing it because she would have wanted it." Layla glanced at the boy, her face softening. He's sweet, polite. "I try," David said, looking away. "He's all I have left." There was a vulnerability in his voice that made Layla shift slightly. She wasn't used to it. Most men she'd met, especially in such moments, hid their secrets behind charm. But David wasn't trying to impress her. He was simply here and honest. "I'm sorry about his mother," she said. "Thank you," he replied, meeting her gaze. For a moment, the fire crackled between them like a bridge slowly being built. Layla stood up. "I have a clean blanket at the end of the hall. I'll get it." She walked across the creaking wooden floor to the linen closet, pausing as she took her softest blanket, sewn by her grandmother many years ago. It was white with tiny blue flowers. She rarely used it. Neatly folded, it lay on top of the pile. She sighed and took it. Returning to the living room, Layla stopped in the doorway. David was sitting on the floor next to Elijah. The child was half asleep, moaning softly. David, not noticing her, dipped a washcloth into a bowl of water and gently wrung it out. With slow, practiced movements, he applied the cool cloth to the boy's forehead, whispering something so quietly Layla couldn't make out the words. That washcloth was hers, one of the last clean white ones she kept separate from the rest. She watched as David re-wet the cloth, wiped Elijah's cheeks, then carefully folded the towel and placed it beside the bowl. He then stood up, went to the kitchen, and thoroughly washed the cloth before returning it to its place, folded as neatly as before. He didn't notice she was watching. Layla looked at the blanket in her hands, then slowly walked back into the room. "Here," she said softly, extending it. David turned slightly, surprised. "It's beautiful, warm," she said, "and clean." He took the blanket. Their hands brushed for a moment. "Thank you." She sat back by the fireplace, but this time a little closer. For the first time in a long time, the room was filled not just with people, but with something else, a sense of peace. As David settled back next to his son, adjusting the blanket on the boy's small body, he looked at Layla. "You didn't have to let us in," he said quietly. "I know. You didn't have to feed us, offer your best blanket, or pretend you weren't scared," she replied, her voice barely audible. "I'm not pretending," she whispered. He smiled a faint but genuine smile. "Thank you for everything anyway. I won't forget this night." After that, they fell silent. The fire crackled, the wind howled, but in the heart of the storm, the little cabin glowed softly, and for one night, warmth prevailed. The snow did not stop. By morning, the world outside the cabin was submerged in a thick white silence. Roads were hidden under a blanket of snow, trees groaned under the weight of it, and even the faint tracks from the previous night had disappeared. Layla stepped out onto the porch, wrapped in a warm coat and scarf, her work boots crunching softly on the fresh snow. The air was still biting cold, but soft enough that the roads might finally clear. Inside, David and Elijah were still asleep, curled together on the sofa, breathing quietly in the early morning light. Layla paused in the doorway. She wanted to say something, anything, to ask if they would still be there when she returned, to offer them another night, but the words caught in her throat. It was her first shift in days, and she couldn't miss it. So she left the fire stoked near the fireplace, laid out firewood, and left a small note on the kitchen table. "Back by 4. Make yourselves at home." When she arrived at the town's small cafe where she worked part-time, her thoughts kept returning to them. Every time the bell above the entrance chimed, she looked up, but it wasn't David and Elijah. When her shift ended, she almost ran to catch the shuttle back to the mountains. By the time she reached her cabin, the sky was already tinged with orange. The porch was quiet, no footprints in the fresh snow, no laughter from inside. Her heart sank. She pushed the door open. The fire had almost burned out, but still glowed. The blankets were neatly folded, the dishes in the sink washed and drying. The room was clean, almost untouched. They were gone. A sharp pain spread through her chest. On the dining table lay a folded piece of paper, weighted down by something small and smooth. She approached slowly. The paper was cream-colored, with faint, almost imperceptible lines. Her name wasn't on it, but she knew it was for her. She unfolded the sheet. Thank you for the warmth, for the kindness, for reminding me that there are still people like you in the world. I will never forget it. There was no signature, only a line at the bottom, written in soft, almost hesitant handwriting. You helped more than you know. Next to the note lay a black card. No name, no bank name, just a small chip and a row of numbers. She picked it up, her heart pounding. The card felt heavier than a regular credit card, elegant, mysterious. A black card, the kind only the ultra-rich possess. She stared at it, stunned. First confusion, then disbelief, then something she couldn't name. She slowly put the card down and sat on the edge of the sofa where David had told stories to his son the night before. Her fingers tightened around the note. He had left without a goodbye, without an explanation, without giving her a chance to say what had begun to blossom in her heart. She hadn't expected it to hurt so much. She thought she'd feel relief, freedom to breathe. Her home was back to her. Instead, she felt an empty ache, as if someone had opened a door to her heart and left before she realized they had entered. Her eyes burned with tears. The cabin was silent, and for the first time in a long time, Layla cried not from fear, not from pain, but from longing for something she never expected to find, and not knowing if she would ever see it again. The next morning, Layla stood in line at the town's only bank, clutching the mysterious black card in her coat pocket. Her breath fogged the glass doors as she waited to be let inside. Along the way, her mind waged an internal battle. One part screamed to use the card. The other clung to what she'd always held on to. Pride. When her number was called, she walked hesitantly to the counter. I found this, she said, carefully placing the card on the counter. I just want to know who it belongs to. The teller looked at her in surprise but entered a few numbers. After a few seconds, her eyebrows rose slightly. This is a private account, the woman said carefully. The name is not publicly listed. High status. I cannot disclose details, but whoever gave you this card must trust you very much. I don't need the money, Layla quickly said. I'm not going to use it. I just needed to know. The woman nodded slowly and returned the card across the counter. Layla left with more questions than answers and put the card away in a drawer without opening or touching it again. Days turned into weeks. The snow began to melt, the wind died down, and the nights grew quieter. Layla returned to her routine, repairing the cabin, working at the library twice a week, picking up extra shifts at the cafe when she could. But everything felt duller. The echo of the laughter from that stormy night lingered, as did the image of the dark-haired man by the fireplace, making paper animals for his son. She often woke in the middle of the night, staring at the door, expecting a knock, and then, one Monday, everything fell apart. She arrived at the small-town library and saw a sign tacked to the door. Closed indefinitely. Funding discontinued. Inside, her boss was packing up the last books. I'm so sorry, Layla, the woman said, barely meeting her eyes. They're closing rural branches. There's nothing we can do. That day, Layla walked home with numb feet, each step feeling heavier. 2 jobs gone in less than 3 months. No family, no support, and the bills had already started piling up. By the end of the week, her firewood supply was dwindling, her fridge was half empty, and her bank account had dipped below 20. She tried selling crafts online, even her old typewriter, but nothing helped. The silence in the cabin grew heavier with each passing day. Then the letter came. It was slid under her door on a Wednesday afternoon in a thick, cream-colored envelope. Her name was handwritten in elegant, measured strokes. She opened the letter slowly. Inside was a single sheet, printed on crisp, embossed paper. Dear Miss Layla Thompson, we are pleased to invite you for a personal interview for a newly established community outreach program at RN Holdings. We are seeking individuals of rare character, strong values, and demonstrated compassion. Your name has been personally recommended. Please come to our downtown office at the appointed time. Transportation expenses will be covered. Sincerely, David R., CEO of RN Holdings. Her hands trembled. She read the letter again and again. David. She sank onto the edge of the sofa, in the very spot where he had once sat with Elijah, pressed the letter to her chest, and took a deep breath. He remembered and found her. She didn't know what kind of interview it was. Why now? Why, after all this time, he was reaching out. But one thing was clear. Her story with David was not over. Layla stood in the lobby of the gleaming glass building. Polished marble floors reflected her boots, still dusted with mud from the mountain road. The ceiling soared high above her, adorned with golden light. and people moved around her with quiet determination in elegant suits and polished shoes. She felt like a stranger in a strange land. Clutching the invitation in one hand, she approached the reception desk. "I have an appointment with R.N. Holdings. My name is Layla Thompson," she said. "Yes, we were expecting you," the woman finished, smiling warmly. "Please take the elevator to the 32nd floor. Mr. Rivera will meet you personally." Layla blinked. "Mr. Rivera?" "Yes," the receptionist said, already tapping buttons on her headset. "He's the CEO." She entered the elevator, her heart pounding. The numbers above the doors slowly climbed, each floor bringing back memories. Elijah laughing by the fireplace, David serving her soup, his quiet "thank you" on a snowy night. The doors opened, revealing a quiet, elegant space. A woman in a dark blue dress politely gestured her into a large office with transparent walls. And there he was. David stood by the window, tall and composed, in a charcoal suit. He stood with his back to her, but when she entered, he turned. Their eyes met. Time stood still for a moment. He smiled, warm, calm, familiar. "Layla." She took a deep breath. "David." He took a step forward, his hands resting loosely at his sides. He looked the same, yet different, stronger, more confident, but with the same quiet kindness in his eyes. "I thought you'd come," he said. "You invited me," she replied softly. "I hoped you'd say yes," he said quietly, and gestured to a small seating area by the window. "Please sit." She sank into the armchair, lightly gripping the armrests. He walked to a shelf, took out a flat folder, and handed it to her. Inside was a single sheet, a child's drawing, a cabin in the snow, a tall man, a small boy, and a blonde woman opening the door. Her eyes widened. "You kept this," she whispered. David smiled softly. "I took it," he confessed. "That morning, I knew Elijah would want me to. He called you our angel. That night, I wanted to keep a piece of what that night meant." She looked at him. David was now sitting opposite her, leaning forward. "I didn't tell you who I was. I didn't plan on showing up that night, but for the entire month after, I tried to figure out how to repay what can't be repaid." Layla slowly shook her head. "I didn't do anything extraordinary. You gave us shelter, dignity. You gave Elijah warmth and safety when we had neither. And you gave me something I thought I'd lost forever." She paused. "Hope." She remained silent, clutching the drawing in her hands. David continued in a calm voice. "I used to think the only way to build something solid was through power and control. But you reminded me what true strength looks like. Quiet, brave, kind." He stood up and walked to his desk, pulling out another folder. "I've created a community outreach program, education, assistance for rural areas, all based on that one night." He looked at her. "And I want you to lead it." Layla blinked. "I." He nodded. "You lived it. You understand what it means to give without expecting anything in return. That's the kind of leader I want." She looked at the folder on her lap, then back at him. Her voice trembled. "This isn't about money, is it?" David smiled. "No, never was." She looked at him, the man who once sat by the fire in boots and a flannel shirt, and who now offered her not just a job, but a place in the story he was still writing. And she nodded. "I accept," she said. Not for the title, not for the office, but because in his eyes she saw what she hadn't seen in her own reflection for a long time. A purpose. And because she believed him not just as a CEO, but as a man who once whispered, "Thank you," in the dark, and meant it. The following weeks unfolded in a quiet rhythm, yet with each passing day, Layla and David grew closer. Their new program under R.N. Holdings, named the Open Doors Initiative, focused on providing long-term housing, vocational training, and childcare for single parents and the homeless. The program's core was based on the principle Layla had unwittingly embodied the night she opened her cabin door. Kindness without conditions transforms lives. At every meeting, every site visit, every late-night email exchange, they stood shoulder to shoulder. They argued passionately, David pragmatic in results, oriented, Layla empathetic, and fiercely protective of every voice. Sometimes they clashed, but they always listened to each other, and by the end, found a way forward that blended integrity and heart. Layla had never felt more seen. Every morning, coffee awaited her on her desk, exactly as she liked it. 2 sugars, no cream, with a sprinkle of cinnamon on top. David never mentioned it, but she noticed every time. Sometimes they worked late, poring over proposals, discussing complex logistics. Other evenings, he would silently walk her to her car. Their shoulders would sometimes brush in the darkness, no words yet spoken about what was growing between them, only glances that lingered and gestures that meant more than they dared to say aloud. Then came the gala evening, a high-profile event at the company's main site, a former warehouse now serving as a modern temporary housing center. Donors, press, city officials, and nonprofit leaders filled the hall. Layla, in a simple dark blue dress, delivered a speech about the night. Everything changed about the firelight, the soup, and the boy with a fever. She didn't name David, but as soon as she stepped off the stage, a reporter approached her. Some say your rapid ascent within N is linked to a personal relationship with Mr. Rivera. Can you confirm or deny that your role is due to favoritism? Layla froze. Her breath caught. Her hands trembled slightly, but she stood firm. I was offered this position based on... She didn't finish. David calmly but decisively stepped forward. His voice was even as he addressed the assembled crowd. If you'll allow me, he said, placing a confident hand on Layla's back. Then, without hesitation, he gently took her hand and turned to face the room. The woman standing beside me changed the course of my life, he said, his voice deeper than mere defense. When I had nothing, no power, no title, she offered me and my son shelter, asking nothing in return. He looked at Layla, and something passed between them that silenced even the most cynical reporter. She didn't see a CEO or an influential man. She saw two people in need and opened a door. He turned back to the crowd. Everything we've built here was born from that moment. And if this company has done any good since then, it's thanks to her heart. There was a silence, then applause. Layla looked at their clasped hands warm, strong. She didn't know when he had taken her hand or why her heart felt like it would burst with fullness. Later that night, as the lights dimmed and the guests left, they remained alone in the center of the room. You didn't have to say all that, she whispered. David looked at her with soft eyes. I had to. And for the first time, he didn't let go of her hand. Winter returned gently. Snow fell like silk, blanketing the evergreens and winding roads with quiet grace. At the end of one such road stood the old cabin, no longer forgotten, now lovingly restored. Its bones were the same, the spirit untouched, warm, humble, waiting. David invited Layla and Elijah to spend the weekend. After a year of working together, building shelters, launching programs, learning each other's rhythm set felt right. However, Layla didn't know where they were going until they rounded the last bend. She gasped when she saw it. The cabin stood, like a memory brought to life. Her boots crunched on the freshly sanded steps. The front door still creaked, and the air was filled with pine and cinnamon, just as she remembered. And above the fireplace, neatly framed in glass, hung Elijah's drawing, a golden-haired woman opening a door to a man and his son against a snowy backdrop. You kept it? She whispered. David smiled softly. It was the first place Elijah called home again. The weekend passed peacefully. They cooked together in the small kitchen, filled with laughter. Music played softly from speakers David had installed. Elijah ran from room to room as if he had always lived there, asking if they could stay forever. That night after dinner, Elijah fell asleep on the sofa under the same blanket she had once covered him with. Layla stepped out onto the porch, hugging herself against the cold, watching the falling snow. David silently joined her. After a long pause, he turned to her. Will you come with me for a minute? She followed him to the steps where warm light emanated from the cabin. He reached into his coat pocket and knelt on one knee. Not in a grand hall, but in the very spot where she had once opened the door to him. He held out a simple silver ring. Engraved inside the band were 6 small words. Thank you for opening the door. His eyes met hers. I used to think I didn't deserve a family, he said quietly. That what I had lost couldn't be found again. But you changed that with your hands, with your heart. You made a place for us when no one else could. Her eyes filled with tears. I don't promise perfection, he continued, but I will always keep the door open for you, for Elijah, for everything we build together. He extended the ring, his hand trembling slightly. Will you open it once more, for a lifetime? Layla didn't answer with words. She knelt beside him, embracing him and holding him tightly, just as she had once held his sonnet out of fear, but with love. A slight sound broke the moment. Elijah stood in the doorway, rubbing his sleepy eyes. Miss Layla, Mama, you made Daddy smile, just like that first night. David laughed, pulling Layla close. She wiped her eyes and looked at the boy who had unwittingly connected their lives, and then at the man who had finally come home. The snow continued to fall around them softly and silently. No large crowds, no glittering diamonds, just one door, once opened in a storm, and never closed again. Sometimes the most beautiful beginnings are born from the simple act of opening a door. If this story has touched your heart, reminded you that kindness matters, that love can arrive quietly, and that second chances often come wrapped in snow and silence, we invite you to be part of similar moments. Subscribe to the channel to hear more stories of hope, love, resilience, and the small choices that change lives forever. May your heart be filled with story after story.